Hello and welcome to this video, which is designed to help teachers of maths get the best from Exampro. Over the next 10 minutes or so, I'll be showing you some of the important aspects of Exampro that you might have missed. When we first log into Exampro, you see what we call the Gatekeeper. Now, you can get quite a lot of subjects of Exampro, and your Gatekeeper might turn into one of these, which gets very big. So a quick way of focusing down on maths is by clicking on maths on the left hand side, and then you only see the maths question banks. You'll notice that there are two tabs, one for the current year and one for the archive. The idea of this is that there are some questions that were in the past papers that are no longer relevant to the new specs, but you might have students who are doing resits, so you might want to go back to those specifications, or there might be some topics that have been taken out of the specifications but actually you would like to use in your teaching, maybe to extend your students. So we leave those questions in the archive and you can go and look at them there. If we go into Gcse Maths, which is one of our best used products, then you will see it's also one of our biggest products with 2,293 questions at the moment and more to come. The questions come from a number of years, and if you look at the session, you can see that we go back to 2010. Now, each one of the questions all the way through has been checked by a subject expert to decide whether it is still suitable for the new specifications, mainly in content. So it may be that now and then some of the work that AQA have been doing recently on accessibility, they might be slightly more verbose than they'd expect or whatever, but they should be absolutely fine from the content point of view all the way through. If I reset that search, if you want to find out where a particular question comes from, then you can click on the question IDs. So by doing that, you can see this little code appear. Now this one, the top of the list at the moment is the new specification specimen questions, so that would be new spec there. If I go back a bit, we go back in time and we get to, for example, question from 2016, January, paper 2 higher, question 10. And so you can work out where the questions comes from that. So that's quite useful if you're searching for particular questions. Now, one of the things people don't know about is that you can combine the searches within Exampro. So, for example, if I was teaching solving equations and inequalities in algebra, if I've now gone down to 290 questions, I can then segregate this. Maybe I've got a higher tier class, a high ability class, and I've now got 107 questions, and I can look at those questions and decide which questions I want. I could add that I want to look at the non-calculator questions, and I'm starting to add these different searches together. So, and maybe I'm particularly focusing on AO3. Now I've got 4 questions focused on AO3 from the non-calculator paper, and I can pull them down into my test. But maybe I also want some AO2 questions, so I can go back to my search and then choose AO2, and now I've got the 19 questions on AO2, and I can add some of these to my search, or my test. Now I've got some non-calculator higher tier AO2 questions start, and then I finish with my AO3, or you can do it whichever way you want. So that's a really useful way of speeding up your searches, is by combining them, clicking back into the search. Once I've finished with that, I want to reset my search, and maybe for the sake of making sure that my students don't forget something, I want to stick in a geometry question. I can then do that. That's fine. And that the document doesn't change. I can then save my document. I can save it, so that was algebra. Save it to my online library. That will appear here if I open my saved documents, and I can open that to whenever I want. The other thing that you'll notice is when you save that document, this link here appears. Now, if I click on that link, I get a web page with all the questions that I just looked at on a web link. Now, you can share that with your students, and you'll see it's 8 letters plus exampro.net, and that's very simple to give your students a load of questions without having to print them. That's useful in itself, but then what you can also do, they can't answer the questions on there, unfortunately. They can only use those questions and answer in their books or on paper or whatever, but you could then share later the mark schemes. So if I save the changes with the mark schemes and then I go back and I reset, then I get my mark schemes, so I can share my questions, get the students to answer the questions, and then get them to mark the questions later. That's really useful. Now if I reset that whole thing, one of the things that we find is that teachers like to know which questions that they've used before. So for example, if I was teaching iteration, there aren't that many questions on iteration at the moment in the specification, so I want to make sure that I keep some of them back for my topic test. So what I can do is I can pull down all of the questions into my document, and a simple way of doing this for up to 60 questions is by clicking on the top, and then what I'm doing is I'm holding down my shift key and I'm going to click on the bottom question, and you notice this little plus sign appears. If I click that plus sign, then I get all of those questions into my document. I can then open a second document, and what I can then do is I can segregate my questions. So I can decide that I want that question for my topic test and I want that question for my topic test. I can then save these as iteration for the class use, save to my online library, and I can use this one, iteration test, save to my online library. And what I can even do is I could give them the link for the iteration class, and they could use those as their revision questions. And I know that they haven't seen any of these questions that I've put into my test. So that's a really useful way of segregating. You can do that at the beginning of when you're first about to teach the new topic, or anyway way through, but it's quite useful to do it right at the beginning. You could do it at the beginning of the year, set them all up, and then you've got them to go for. Incidentally, if you're sharing these links, please don't put them on the open internet. Put them on your VLE, put them in worksheets, that's absolutely fine. But if you put them on the open internet, then you're sharing those questions with students who are at other schools. And likewise, please do not share any logins to Exampro with students. Students tend to stick them on the student room, and then we find that everyone has got access to every question, and that doesn't help anyone. So share your collections via the web link and keep them within your school is the best way of doing it. Now, another thing that can be useful is the examiner's reports. Examiner's reports tend to be very dry documents, and it's quite difficult to get your head around an examiner's report after a series of exams, because there's too much in there for you to be able to take in. However, if you think about it in another way, in Exampro, it can really help. So for example, if I was going to teach, let's say, using compound units. So if I go to using compound units, I'm about to start this topic. I'm not really confident in teaching it, or I haven't taught it for a while. The first few questions will be the specimen questions, so they won't have examiner's reports. After that, you'll start to get the examiner's reports. So you can start to see common errors. So the common error was to incorrectly read the horizontal timescale. So I can look out for that in my teaching. If I go further down, I could find students who use build-up methods to work out the percentage were less successful using more formula methods. So you can start to see where students make mistakes or have misconceptions. Small number of students assume that 2.5 hours was 2 hours 50 minutes. So again, you can look at these in your classes. You can go through just before you start a topic, and you can focus on the misconceptions, the errors that students make, and you can try and steer your students away from making those same mistakes. That's a really useful use of the examiner's reports within Exampro. So I hope that you found this little video useful. Please give us some feedback and anything that you'd like to know more, and good luck with using Exampro. Thank you and goodbye.